Jazakallah khair. So, thank you for everyone, to everyone for joining on the third day of Eid. So, I hope you all had a good celebration and you're not too bloated and you've got through your Eid leftovers today so you can start afresh from Monday. So, thank you for joining. The title is Sight Matters Children's Eye Health in a Digital World. And thank you, Jazakallah khair, to Saqib for inviting me to this. He told me about this a couple of weeks ago. And as he mentioned, I work in my speciality is medical retina and cataract surgery. So it's a bit outside of my comfort zone, but I've done some research and it's actually really helped me put this together to understand how we can save our children really going forward and what we can do to minimize the effects of certain eye conditions. So I'll just be moving on. I put a little agenda together: common vision problems in children, followed by signs that your child may have a visual issue. And then we're going to address myopia or short-sightedness on its own. And then we're going to finish off with ingredients for good eye health. And then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions at the end. So if you have questions, Hafiz Saqib said, just pop them in the chat or write them down as you go along and we can address those. And he's more than qualified and he's got lots of experience in the field himself as well. So I'm sure he can give me a helping hand as we go along. The first thing I wanted to do is bring up a question. And that question is, how influential is our environment when considering eye health? So I wanted to get a bit of perspective from the audience to see what you think about that. So you can scan the QR code. Or what I'll also do is if you're joining on your mobile, you can't use your camera, I will copy this link and I will pop it into the chat. Just a sec. Let me do that. Okay, so there's a link for that in the chat if you can't copy, and I'll just go back to that slide. Okay, thank you, Saqib. I just okay, you can see me. That's fine. Okay, did anybody manage to click on this? Or let's see if we've got any responses. I'll give a minute or so. Okay. 9. Okay. Okay, it's coming down. Okay, it's going up 7.6, creeping up to 8. Okay, good. Maybe we've got. I think that bell means somebody joined in late. So we'll just give them the chance to scan this code or just copy the link. And the question is, how influential is our environment when considering eye health? And the reason I put this question in here, I wanted to get a bit of perspective from the audience. But in my own opinion, environment is so important in everything that we do. To make our environment conducive to what we want to gain. So the example that I was taught when it comes to environment is, if you imagine somebody who's trying to give up smoking, but they always go around with a packet of cigarettes in their pocket, then you'd question that person just to say, look, is your environment really conducive towards you stopping smoking? And then when it comes to health in general, and in this particular example, eye health, then environment is just as important. I mean, many in here might be homeschooling or thinking about homeschooling as well, and that the reason for that is we want to make a conducive environment in line with our own values, so that then why should health be any different? And I'm glad to see that the score is high there. So that gives us a good sort of foundation that we're going off. So thank you for participating. There's another question coming later. So just keep that link or that page on your phone handy so we can answer that question later. Okay, so common visual problems in children. I'm just going to go through a couple here. Nothing too science heavy. If there's too much medical jargon, if you're not, if you don't understand, just pop a note in the chat, and we can try and explain in more straightforward terms. But the first one I wanted to address is something that we call amblyopia. Okay, which literally in Greek it translates into dull vision. And what it is it's reduced vision in one eye for whatever reason. Okay, and the reasons are caused by issues with the development of vision, and that usually that development issue can affect a child from birth up to 7 years, and that time frame, so birth till 7 years, is what we call a critical period of developing amblyopia. So basically, that's when it develops. During that period of age 0 to 7, the visual system is what we call plastic. So we can sort of like influence it in certain ways. So we can fix that as long as it's identified early. Okay. The underlying sort of causes of amblyopia or lazy eye are usually one of three things. Okay. One is called a strabismus or a strab or a squint, as people like to call it. And what that means is the two eyes are not aligned. Okay. One eye is straight and the other eye will be either turned inwards or outwards, or an iso or an exotropia, depending on which way it's turned. But in essence, one eye is focused in one direction and another eye is focused in another direction. And the brain can't sort of fuse those two images because we need the two images to be similar. So when one is different, then the brain, what it does is it suppresses that eye. And then that goes on to develop lazy eye or amblyopia. And that means that the vision in that eye will remain reduced throughout that person's life. Okay. So if that's not picked up early and addressed early, it will lead to a permanent reduction in vision in that eye. There are things that you can have done to correct that. So if it's a turn in the eye, that can be surgically corrected. Other sort of underlying mechanisms of developing lazy eye are sort of what we call refractive error. So maybe one eye is very long-sighted or short-sighted, or it has a funny shape, which is usually corrected with glasses. Or what we call a stimulus deprivation, meaning that there's nothing going into that eye because something's physically blocking it. Okay, it could be something like a cataract, or it could be something like a scar tissue that's developed at the front of the eye. Or I remember even one of our teachers at university, even he saw this develop in a child who would always go to school but lean on the desk. So they'll do this. They'll lean on the desk like that and cover one eye for sort of like prolonged periods of time. Which means that eye, there was no stimulus, there was nothing going into the eye to make it function. And over time, doing that for like 4 or 5 hours per day meant that eye didn't develop as strong as the other eye. So that's what we call stimulus deprivation. It means that there's something physically blocking vision from going into that eye. So there are three sort of underlying causes of amblyopia or lazy eye. Okay. Other common visual problems in children can be due to what we call refractive error. It's a very posh term for needing glasses. Okay, and there's different types of refractive error. There's different sort of reasons that we need to wear glasses. The first one is short-sightedness, which is what I am basically, and what the majority of Asians are, where we need to wear glasses to make a clearer image for the distance. But when it comes for near, it doesn't really matter if I wear them or not. Okay, so my main reliance on glasses is anything beyond my arm's length. I keep them on all the time just because it's easy for me. If I take them off now, my screen is about an arm's length away. You know, I'm struggling to read what's there. Okay, but if I was to hold something closer, if I was to really like come closer to the screen, I'll be able to read it. So the more short-sighted you are, the closer you have to get to things to be able to read them. Okay, long-sighted is the opposite of that. So you've got great vision in the distance, but when it comes to near, that's when you need that extra help in terms of wearing your glasses. Okay. Astigmatism is a funny one because it affects both. So it affects both distance and near, and it is related to the shape of your eye. Okay, so you might have heard people explain it as you're having a rugby ball shaped eye rather than a football shaped eye. So that's a very common analogy to explain what astigmatism is. It's related to the curvature of the eye. Okay, so there are three reasons that that will lead you to needing wearing glasses. And they form part of common visual problems in children. And the third one is probably something that you might not hear of so often, and it's a color vision deficiency or color vision defect. Okay, it's quite common. Actually, it's found in 1 in 200, and it affects males more than females. So it affects 1 in 12 males and 1 in 200 females. And it's it's an inherited condition, so it's genetic. And the most common person in your family is your mum's father that you would inherit that off. So if we've got some sisters in the audience, if your father has a visual field defect, a color vision defect, then that's something that you should be looking for in your younger children. And so that's something to bear in mind. Okay. Signs that my child may have an issue. Okay, some of these are obvious. Like the picture's quite obvious. So that's what we call a strabismus. Okay, or a squint, and you can clearly see that one eye is aligned and the other eye is misaligned. So in this case, it's the patient's left eye that's misaligned, or the right side of the image, just to make it easy. So that's what lazy eye or amblyopia or strabismus looks like. And if you saw that, obviously that's a sign that, what, something's not right here. We need to get this investigated. But other signs would be your child complaining of poor vision. The really common one we hear is, I brought my child in today for a routine eye examination because they're struggling to see the board at school. Okay, that's the most common one. I'm sure Saki would agree with that. Other things that they might be complaining of, the subtitles on the TV, I have to get quite close to see them, or I have to get quite close to the TV to see what's going on. Headaches are another reason, especially in long-sighted or children with astigmatism. They might need that extra focus at near, so they might get headaches, especially after a prolonged time of reading. Feedback from teachers at the school, so they might say a similar thing. Your child is not reading very well, or for too long. They have to sort of have a break from reading, or they have to get closer to the board, or they're asking the children which are sat next to them, like, what's that on the board? I remember that happened to me. Squinting to see things, eye turns, like that example there that we've mentioned, and difficulty reading or slow reading speed. So if you're ever going through some material with your child and you're asking them to read a story or anything, or any reading material for that as an example, if they're reading quite slowly and they're struggling and they give up after a short period of time, then that's a sign that they might have an issue with their vision. So that's a sign that you need to get them booked in for an eye examination. Which leads us on to the importance of early intervention, which links into development. If they're not reading very well, they may be behind in their development. Confidence as well. So if they're always sort of having to get up and read the board at school, or if they're short-sighted and they're struggling to play football, that's going to affect their confidence, or whatever it may be. They won't be as confident if they can't see as well. Development and learning kind of goes hand in hand. If they're struggling to read and they have to give up, or they're getting headaches, and so that will affect their learning. And to avoid complications in the future as well. So if you know that they have that problem, it's better to address it early, especially with things like amblyopia. And if they've got an eye that turns in or out, it's better to sort of like have those options early on, so you can get the treatment for that. So myopia, which is something that it's been in the news quite a lot recently. You might have seen a lot of articles about myopia and about short-sightedness. And I've written here, what's the big deal? Because I'm short-sighted. I mean, don't you just wear glasses? Don't you just wear contact lenses? If it's really bad, potentially you can have laser to correct the shape of the cornea, in your 20s or 30s, or even get an implanted lens. So what's the big deal when it comes to myopia? So um, it develops, early childhood, about around the age of 6 years old, 6 to 12, but the most rapid progression can be from 7 to 10 years old, and most stabilize by early 20s. But the sort of the more severe cases or the higher myopes, they might even go on to continue developing more and more short-sightedness in their 30s or 40s. Actually, the week before Hafiz Saqib asked me to do this, I was at a conference in Liverpool. It was a Royal College of Ophthalmologists. I wasn't invited like I was invited here. I made my way in. I snuck in on a free ticket because my workplace had a stand there. So I was like, give me a ticket to that. So I went on to that. And it was funny because the ophthalmologists, so these guys are like eye doctors, surgeons. They've got years and years in the field, really highly qualified, really knowledgeable people. And one of them made a remark to say, so they did a presentation on myopia. And one of them made a remark to say, you know what, myopia has become what diabetes used to be for us. So diabetes, I don't know if you know, but it causes a lot of complications at the back of the eye. And what they were alluding to is because diabetes is being, much more controlled now with drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro and that sort of stuff, it means that people are having less complications in their eyes from diabetes. And what they were saying is there's so much short-sightedness now. It's becoming so common and so rampant, is that we're now going to start having to deal with those complications from short-sightedness like we used to deal with diabetes. So, and then the next week I got a message about children's eye health, and I thought, I better see if I can pass that message on to try and help. Okay. So some of the articles that you might have come across, I've just screenshotted. These are quite recent. One of them was from February this year. The other one was from September, so back end of last year. So all quite relevant. Myopia will affect 740 million children and teenagers by 2050, so not far. And at the moment, currently, it affects 1 in 3 children worldwide. And the analysis revealed a rise in prevalence as the years have gone on. So we've known about myopia rising since the 1990s. So from 90 to 2000, the prevalence was 24%, and it rose to 25% in the 10 years after. But the 10 years after that, from 2011 and 19, it rose to 30%. And then in 3 years, from 2020 to 30, it rose to 36%. And based on those figures and trends, it's projected to reach about 40% of the population by 2050, which will be 740 million people, which is a lot. Okay. And then that article was based on a meta-analysis study. And from that same study came the second article here. So every hour children spend on screens raises chance of myopia, and we'll go on to explain that in the next slide. So if anybody wants to sort of like make a note of this, or if anybody has an interest and they really want to sort of like go geek mode, that's the actual meta-analysis. So that was the review of 45 studies involving 335,524 people. And the mean age of that was about 9 years old. And what they did was they analyzed the relationship between digital screen time and short-sightedness. And what they found was for every 1 additional hour of screen time, it was associated with a higher odds ratio of myopia by 21%. So for every extra hour, there's an increased risk by 21%. The significant increases between 1 and 4 hours. And then that increases, so the significant increases between 1 and 4. And then after 4, there's more of a gradual increase. when you get to 5 hours per day or 6 hours per day or 7 hours per day. It still increases, but the most significant increase is between 1 and 4 hours. They actually did find a safety threshold of less than 1 hour per day. So that means that there, there was no significant higher odd of developing myopia if a child used the screen for less than 1 hour per day. So that you do have that little leeway, but as soon as you get into 1 to 4, it significantly increased. And after that, it still increased, but not as sharply as it did between 1 and 4. So current strategies for myopia control. I'm going to split these into two different sections. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got reduced screen time and increased time outdoors. Okay, so they're more sort of like lifestyle things, which are hugely important. So very significant. But we'll just go through the sort of myopia management from a spectacles perspective, which a lot of people might have heard about. Sort of like, wearing glasses to correct myopia is one thing, which is what the majority of people do. But new technologies now mean with children, we can actually try and control the amount of myopia to try and reduce the risk of that developing as the child ages. And the way that works is that the glasses have different zones. So they have a clear zone where the child sees very clearly in the middle, but on the edges it's blurred. Okay, and the science behind that is through aberration. So meaning that they'll have a central clear vision and peripheral blurred vision, which reduces the drive of the eye to keep becoming more and more short-sighted. Okay, which is a similar thing when it comes to contact lenses. They have different zones of clear and blurred vision. And there is a form of eye drops which are not available in the UK. They're very, very strong, very potent. They disable the muscle and they alter the blood flow, which in turn sort of stops the eye from growing. So you might hear terms like axial length and a longer eye, which means that they're short-sighted. So short-sighted people have a longer eye, and the longer the eye, the more short-sighted they are. Okay, but the studies and all the articles, they tell you to do two things. And one of those things is reduce your screen time, as we just learned from that analysis. Between 1 and 4 hours, it significantly increases. So that tells us we need to be reducing our screen time. We need to tell our children, don't use your screen as much as you do, and try and minimize that as much as possible. That goes hand in hand with increasing your time outdoors. If they're indoors, they're going to be using the screen. If they're outdoors, hopefully they're not using their screen and they're kicking a football or they're playing tennis or they're doing something. Okay, so those two things are strategies to try and help reduce the risk of developing short-sightedness. One thing I forgot to mention about the contact lenses. So one of the ways is to sort of the clear vision in the middle, blurred vision on the side, but there is a type of contact lens which kind of alters the shape of the front of the eye to make it less short-sighted. So there's a couple of ways that can be done. But in terms of protecting our children and going forward and building good habits whilst we do that, reducing screen time and increasing the time that they spend outdoors is absolutely key from a very young age. Okay. So people have already answered, alhamdulillah. So how can you minimize your child's screen time? Um, okay, what I might have to do is go on a longer version. Somebody's written son, so I'm going to say that. I'm going to think that maybe your son is just a boy, so you can't help it. But lead as an example, physical activities, reading books. Reading books is interesting because reading a book is still sort of the same problem because it's still a near stimulus. But these studies are all sort of geared towards digital screens. So they specifically address the issues with digital screens rather than reading books. But reading books could have the same problem. However, it's a better problem to have reading a book because you're benefiting in many more ways than you are when a child's watching YouTube or Netflix or whatever. Alternative, absolutely. Physical activity, hit the nail on the head. That's spot on. That's exactly what we're trying to sort of get our children to do. which will build habits for later in life. And we're going to move on to sort of the longer term implications, and physical activity is definitely something we need throughout our life. Entertainment options, absolutely correct. Other things that you need to get them: home activities, online school, excellent. Again, that's a lot of screen time, but it may not necessarily be at near. Okay, so you can make things further away. Lighting around the child, absolutely. Exercise, TV, good option. All good options. Let me just see if I can have a look at these longer. Oh, there you go. That's better. Lighting around the child when TV, excellent. Physical activity at home or sports, encourage physical activities, good. Introduce that don't involve a screen. Yeah, there you go. It just picked out reading books, but yeah, absolutely. More time at my son does online. My son does online school, so that's what you meant. So that's a good point. But try and offset that. If it's on a screen, move it further away. Link the screen to the television. Take regular breaks. Make sure that they're doing something outside of that as well. Alternative or entertainment, reduce screens. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. Just get rid of how many screens you have in general. Instead of having an iPad dotted downstairs, upstairs, and screens left, right, and center, just reduce the amount. That's really good. Really good option. Oh, that goes back to that. We had that question before. Maybe some extra people answered. Okay, so just moving on to longer term implications of myopia or short-sightedness. This kind of puts me back to my comfort zone, because I'm a medical retina. So the retina is a layer on the inside of your eye. So I sort of treat conditions which and the way I see, like, people who are short-sighted against people who are not short-sighted, and I see those changes at the back of the eye in short-sighted people. I don't see children, but I see adults. So I think, you would have been a very short-sighted child, and so I see those. So one of the things that I see quite often is structural changes in the retina, so that inner layer of the eye, which is responsible of our vision. If we didn't have a retina, we would have no vision. So it's a very important part of the eye. And being short-sighted, or the more short-sighted you are, the higher risk of having something called a retinal detachment, meaning that the retina, which is the inner layer of the eye, comes away, and that can lead to permanent vision loss. It's a sight-threatening condition which requires surgical intervention, and it's often quite tricky to fix, especially if it goes to a stage where it affects the middle of the retina. So you can lose a lot of vision quite quickly when it comes to retinal detachment. And the main sort of risk factor for developing that is short-sightedness. So if we can, build habits to prevent that earlier on in life, we will sort of reduce the risk of that developing later on in life. Okay. Myopic macular degeneration, quite a mouthful. Myopic means short-sighted. Macula is a region of the retina which is responsible for central vision. And by central vision, what I mean is, if I look directly into this camera and I pick Saqib out, I'm using my central vision to recognize who he is, and everything else will fall under what we call peripheral vision. So the macula is responsible for that central vision, and degeneration changes over a period of time. So short-sighted people are actually at higher risk of developing macular degeneration, which is usually an age-related condition. So you might have heard of AMD, age-related macular degeneration, which tends to affect older people, as the name suggests. But myopic macular degeneration is similar changes which affect that similar part of the retina, but they affect the eye because it's short-sighted rather than it's old, rather than it being age-related. So it's very, very similar in how it affects your vision. In essence, you've got one eye which is short-sighted, one eye which is not short-sighted. The changes in the short-sighted eye the changes in the age-related eye cause age-related macular degeneration, but those same changes in a short-sighted eye cause that same problem, just because it's a longer eye. So the more short-sighted you are, the higher risk of developing that condition, which can affect your central vision quite significantly and can affect driving standards. So the being short-sighted puts you at higher risk of complications in procedures like cataract surgery. So cataract is something that develops on the lens inside of the eye as we age. It's quite a natural process. And it's a very common sort of surgery. It's the most common surgery done under the NHS. It's a sort of replacing the lens inside of the eye. But the more short-sighted you are, the more sort of risk that is involved with that. And with laser vision correction. So you hear a lot of people paying to have their short-sightedness corrected. And it's a double-edged sword because the more short-sighted you are, the higher risk of developing retinal detachment, even with laser vision correction. So again, all reasons that we should be addressing this from a very early age. And another condition which affects the eye is called glaucoma. So there's a higher risk of developing that when you're more short-sighted. Glaucoma is a condition which affects your peripheral vision. So it can lead to tunnel vision almost. It tends to affect older people, and it tends to run in families, but there is an association between short-sightedness and glaucoma. So again, all these things are probably not something that you hear of very often, just because they're quite sort of unique things. But nonetheless, they are related to short-sightedness. So the earlier we intervene and the earlier we try and minimize the risk of myopia and short-sightedness, the less chance we have of developing these things later in life. Our children are our children now for the rest of our life, for the rest of their life, and beyond. So the more we invest in them, obviously the more we will reap ourselves. And if we can minimize all of these things, we're helping them, we're helping ourselves, we're helping the community in general. This is just a slight sort of like visual representation of those conditions, depending on how much. So in terms of short-sightedness, there's a low amount, there's a moderate amount, there's a high amount, depending on how long the eye is and how strong the glasses we need to wear. So in essence, you can see that in all of these conditions, the more short-sighted you are, the higher the risk. Myopic macular degeneration is obviously very, very high, but it doesn't develop in people who are not short-sighted, so that's obvious. But all the other ones, especially for retinal detachment, you can see there's an increased risk of all of those things. Okay. Last couple of slides, which I get asked quite a lot in my clinics about, should I be eating this? Should I be taking a supplement? And I usually give similar or the same advice I'm going to give to everyone here. But in my mind, when I'm speaking to a 75, 80-year-old who has macular degeneration, I'm thinking, you know what, it's too late. Like, these are the kind of things that should be addressed a lot earlier in life. So keeping that relevant to sort of children in a digital age, there's nothing specific for children to say that children should be taking this supplement or eating X, Y, and Z for good eye health. But the most accepted formula for healthy eyes is the AREDS formula, which was a formula that was developed as part of a study, an age-related eye disease study. And the outcome of that was a formula that they said, if you take these things, it will sort of reduce the risk of developing end-stage macular degeneration. But all of those things are still good for your eyes regardless. Okay, so the things that they found which were good for your eyes are vitamin C and E, lutein, zeaxanthin, which originally was beta carotene, which is a form of vitamin A. But in the second part of their study, they made it a bit more specific to say there's two proteins, or there's two carotenoids which are found in the macula, which are called lutein and zeaxanthin. And if you increase that, it reduces the risk of developing macular degeneration. Zinc and copper. So all of those things there on the left-hand side are sort of ingredients of that formula. And when people ask me, I usually say, look, it's something that you can get through your diet, okay? And eating those things in your diet naturally will give you a lot more sort of goodness. Just aside from these vitamin C and E and lutein, they'll come with fiber, they'll come with antioxidants, they'll come with a whole host of things that your body can actually use for other things as well and absorb, rather than taking a supplement, which you have to question how much that is actually absorbed by your body as well, and how much just passes through your kidneys and liver and comes out the other end. So those sort of things, vitamin C and E, are found in a lot of citrus fruits, bell peppers, and berries also. Lutein and zeaxanthin are found in leafy greens, things like kale, spinach, broccoli, and egg yolks. Zinc and copper can be found in seafood, red meat, especially beef, nuts, and seeds. You'll find that eggs have a lot of these things. So eggs are kind of like the multivitamin, so the natural multivitamin, which are really good for your eyes as well. So that was the sort of outcome of the AREDS study. And there's nothing specific for children, but as a parent, or especially me, when I think of the advice that I give to people who are a lot older, who have these conditions, and we're treating them with injections, or we're treating them with surgery, I think that if we were talking 50 years ago, I'd be telling you these are the kind of things that you should be doing. Other ingredients for good eye health, but which are not diet related. So reducing BMI through diet and lifestyle. Okay, so BMI is a known risk factor for a lot of conditions, but you have to consider that the eye is part of a system. Okay, so the healthier you keep the system, the healthier the eye, and the less risk that you have to your vision. Okay, so BMI is actually a risk factor for things like diabetes and cholesterol and blood pressure, all of which can affect the eye. Okay, so you have to sort of keep that in control through your diet and lifestyle. And exercise is something that's recommended for everyone. And as we know, with children, to sort of get them away from the screen and get them outdoors, exercise is definitely high on the list of priorities to do that. But it'll also reduce the risk of myopia. But in later on in life, having those habits, it will reduce the risk of a lot of conditions, which can ultimately affect our eyes as well. Okay. Reducing oxidative stress, which is usually a natural aging process. You might have heard of this term, oxidative stress and antioxidants. So I'm going to try and explain it as simply as possible. So oxidative stress is an imbalance between two things. One of those things is called free radicals, and the other thing is called antioxidants, which is a really good thing to have. Free radicals naturally occur as a byproduct of lots of things that we do, like metabolizing food, inflammation. But if you've got too much of one thing and not enough of the other, it can cause damage to the cells. So if you've got too many free radicals and not enough antioxidants to sort of reduce those and reduce the effect of those, that's what can affect your eyes and your body in general. It's an it's an aging process, but things that accelerate it very quickly is smoking is one of those things. So definitely we want to avoid smoking ourselves, and definitely pass that message on to our children as well, in the context of keeping your eyes healthy and keeping your vision, or reducing the risk of vision as much as possible. A little closing remark: the eye is part of a system. If you look after the system to minimize, or look after the system to minimize risking vision by implementing good habits from an early age. And thank you everyone for taking the time out on a Sunday evening, the third day of Eid.